Welcome, Java students, to the world of file input and output. In this tutorial series, we're going to learn about the basics of setting up, reading and writing capabilities within Java. Then we're going to make some utility files to help us build some functionality we'll be using later on in our project. And then I'll introduce the content for the project and the challenges that you'll be facing. For right now, I've just made a basic intro kind of file here. You might want to write this code down alongside me so that you have a better understanding of how this all works. I've set up three classes, a reader and a writer class. Each one have a simple empty method. One's called read from file in the reader. And in the writer, I have a write to file empty method here. And my runner just sets up the objects so that I can reference them. So far, if I go read dot, I can read from file, but nothing's going to happen yet because I haven't written the code for this. So what we're going to be doing in this lesson is setting up this basic ability to write to and read from a file and try to understand a little bit more about what file reading and writing actually means. So in this intro lesson that you saw before this one, you learned about this idea of a file stream. This idea that there's a flowing set of data that we can kind of enter into and jump out of as we please. And I'll be talking about that metaphor a little bit as we work through some of this content here. But the first thing that I want to think about here is what exactly is a file? So let me open up my folder that this project's inside of. Now, how do I find the folder that my project's inside of? Well, if I go to my project and I right click and go properties, under sources, I will see the folder listed here, and I can triple click on it, copy it, Control C, hit OK, and then paste this up in the top bar of the File Explorer. And here I am in the root folder. And so what do I see in here? Well, I should see this POM file. It's an XML, which is basically just like a structured text document that has some information about my project. And src under source, there's some test file information if we did a test build, but we're always really right now doing a main build. So inside of here, we're going to see that I have my class Java file information. And this kind of company file intro stuff is if I put anything inside of a different package in my project. So this kind of two different storage containers for information. And the one that we've been working with is just the default one usually because it keeps things easily referenced for now. And you'll see that my files are all organized in this folder. And so in Windows, we have like folders and then subfolders and subfolders. We have many different layers of folder structures. And if you look at kind of the source of this document, I'll just forget about this part here, documents and this backslash. This means there's a subfolder underneath it. NetBeans projects, backslash, file.io intro, backslash, src, and there can often be many, many layers of this stuff. So what we want to be thinking about is where we are saving our files. And in this project, we're just going to let NetBeans kind of choose a single file location, which will be right here in our base project file area. So if you head back and see, like, this is the file.io intro project I just made on this computer for this tutorial. If I go in here, this is where our files are going to be appearing and disappearing. We call this a local reference inside of NetBeans, where it's going to go, if you don't specify where to put a file, I'm just going to stick it in the root folder of this project. However, you could, if you wanted to, we're not going to do it in this project, but we could place it anywhere we want on the computer by referencing the specific subfolder directory reference and all the information that we want to in that file. And there's other strategies we can use for this, but we're not really worrying so much about the file management in this so much as just getting the reading and writing up and running in a basic way. So what do I want my writer to be able to do? So let's jump in and we're going to write to a file first. And so what I want to be able to do with a writer is, well, know a couple pieces of information from the user. First, I want to know the file name that is going to be accessed. What is that name of the file itself that I want access to? And then I want to have some data to send to a file here. So I'm just going to build a basic method that allows this information to be sent into it. And now I need to actually write it to the file. So always in Java, we need to have a try catch block for our file input and output. And we have in our catch something called an IO exception. And once I type it in, I need to actually go Control Shift I, and it will import this IO exception up here. So it has to be imported. But you'll see there's still an error here. And it's because I don't have any content inside this. This will be resolved once I start putting in some content. In fact, why don't I just put hello in here? And, oh wait, it needs an actual IO attempt at things. So we'll get there in a sec. First, I want to have my exception print out the error message. So I'm just going to put E, which is the error message itself. We'll just let it be kind of the basic default message. And now we're ready to put in the content for writing to a file. One of the baseline file writing classes in Java is called a FileWriter. And I'm going to call this maybe writer, and it's a new FileWriter. And I don't have it imported yet. I can press Alt-Enter and import the file FileWriter, or just press Control-Shift-I to auto-import it. But this FileWriter needs something to be able to kind of read data about. And in this case, I want to have it be the file name. And we'll deal with another piece of data in a second here. But I basically just need to send the FileWriter the name of the file that we're trying to access. Or trying to create, really. The way this is going to work is if this file name in the directory that we'll be writing to, which will be in here, isn't found, it will create the file. And if it is found, it will change or append content to that file. One thing that would be very smart to spend some time with is actually going and taking a look at the Java FileWriter class and getting a bit familiar with some of the options in it. For example, our constructors, we have to have some file to reference, although it does accept, like here, the file name itself. So I could go either way, but we're going to use file name for now. And we also have another option here, something called Boolean append. Append means we're adding information onto a file. If we do not append, we overwrite the file, meaning it will replace all of its information whenever we write to it. So it's usually a good idea, if you know that this is something that you don't want to be deleting, you just want to add contents to it, then you put a true after the FileWriter here. Or if you're like, I definitely just want to override and just replace all the contents, you can put false to ensure that you know confidently it's going to replace all the contents. For now, I'm just going to leave it at true for that append data information here. Now, what can a FileWriter do? Well, here's a method summary. And we're not going to use actually a lot of inheritance in this unit, but there's inheritance everywhere behind the scenes in Java. And this class, FileWriter, actually inherits from 3 different other classes: the output stream writer, the Java writer, and the Java object, which everything does. These are the 2 in particular that we're worried about. And you're more than welcome to dive in deep, and if you can click on one of these methods, it'll take you right to that output stream writer class and talk about how this all works. But the reality is that this output stream writer and the basic writer, they write contents in a way that's just a little bit clunky for the type of content we'll be using. This writes things like byte data, it writes things like arrays of information, and it puts things in kind of a little bit more I suppose you might want to say kind of directly data-focused information. But we want a little bit of a better interface for doing our writing. I promise you it will make our life a little bit easier. So what we're actually able to do is wrap our FileWriter with another class that's a little bit more user-friendly, called a printWriter. This printWriter, when we construct it, it has similar types of things it needs, either a file or a string, and this printWriter is able to actually accept an output stream in its constructor. And the FileWriter is technically an output stream type object. And so what I can actually do is send my FileWriter to my printWriter. And what I'm doing is wrapping the FileWriter in a bit more of a better interface of content to as an intermediate way of accessing the information. So what I can do here is actually say printWriter, and maybe I'll call this write equals new printWriter, writer, and I'll import that, Control-Shift-I, but I need to give it this initial state of things, and I can actually send it my FileWriter to it. So this FileWriter is technically always going to be used, but it's going to be mediated with the printWriter, which is going to make our life a little bit better. So if I went down here and I typed in writer and accessed the FileWriter directly, I would see that it doesn't have too many options. It has like this write string, a character array, and a few other options. Not too many things, but if I now go to write, the one that's wrapping the FileWriter, look how much more functionality we have. Lots of different options for the writing, and that's going to make our lives a lot easier. So we can wrap the content in that way. There's actually a bit of an easier way to do this to make it a little bit more compress. So maybe lock this in right now. Make sure you get it down, pause it if you don't, and then take a look at what I'm going to do next to make this a little bit more, I guess, just easier to read. I don't actually need to generate the FileWriter on its own line. What I can do is just take this section, the new FileWriter, and replace the writer object with creating a new FileWriter right on that line. And so now, just leave that for now, I'm actually creating the print writer and the FileWriter on the same line. It's just the FileWriter is a part of the print writer. Do note that now I can't go writer dot because, well, I didn't actually define the FileWriter as stored in a variable. But we actually don't ever want to access that directly, so that's not a big deal. In fact, we kind of clarify our code and keep it a little less busy by doing this. So now I have this option to write. And what is this going to do? Well, this has built a data stream to this file. And by appending, it means I can connect to that file and I can add data onto whatever contents it already has. Let's just see really quick what happens if I try to write to a file with a new file name. So I'm going to go to my writer, or my runner, and type in write, and I'm going to write to file. So I need to give it a file name. And now here's a little thing that we need to make sure of. We can actually specify the type of file we want to have created in here as well. I'm going to call this new file, but also give it that .txt file type label. Then I'm going to have some information. Here is some text. Now we're not actually printing this out yet because we haven't actually written anything to the file, but I just want to see what happens when I run this code, and we'll find out. Oh, here's the main class for this. I hadn't built this project yet. And build success. Nothing was printed out because we're not really worrying quite as much right now about what's in the console here. What I'm worried about is this new file that wasn't there before. I'll prove it again. Let's just go like this. Windows on this side here. Let's have this on the edge. Nothing in this folder, although it did create this new, now that I ran my project, it created this new subfolder. We won't worry about that right now. When I run this, because I create the writer and the reference to this new file, it creates it because it's now accessing it. It builds a connection to it. Now, if I open up the file itself, it's empty. There's no content to it because we haven't written anything to it. So let's do some writing. What are some options that we have for, not in here, in my writer class, to write to this file? Well, I can append data of different types to it. I can format information. Won't worry about that right now. The main thing here is all this print functionality. And the print writer kind of tries to make our writing feel very similar to system.out.print, that functionality we're used to using to print to the console, except that now we're printing content into a file, which is pretty great. So I could print out an object or a string or any type of data I want to that file, print it directly, or print line so that there's a new line return after it. For now, I'm just going to do the print line of my data to this file. And press run. And now, once my file's finished processing, and I open up my new file, I don't see any data appearing in this. So what is it that's gone on for my new file to not receive the new information? Well, one of the things about file streams is that we have to enter them by creating them, but we also have to choose when to exit them and close them off. So what I need to do at the end of this track is actually do something called close my writer. I need to close it off. And so that allows kind of the data to, like the file, otherwise it's considered still being open by NetBeans. And so it's kind of like an in-use file that's not fully updated yet. But if I close the file, that means that I've removed NetBeans access to it, or removed my program's access to it, and then it kind of locks in the data in its final form. So now if I run this again, and I let that information be sent over, I'm going to write this data to the file. Notice it's now a kilobyte in size, and if I open this up, allow it to present the new information. Here's some text. Notice it has 2 lines because I did have that return because of my print line. Maybe that's something you want to avoid. If I just went to print, now, actually, here's something interesting to see. If I just go print data now, what would we expect to see in this file? Let's run it and find out. Run my file. It's updated. I press yes to view the new one. And now here is some text twice. Why is it twice? because I add true to the append. If I made this false and ran this again, now I'm overwriting the information, and it only shows up once here. And so this is an important variable to consider, an important Boolean state to append or not to append. I'm gonna leave it as true for now. And so, yeah, we now have the ability to simply write to a file. We've output some information. We're gonna add some more complexity to this in the next lesson, but let's also add the ability to read information from a file. So to read from a file, I'm gonna wanna know the file name itself to read from. And do I want anything else from this? I don't think so. That's gonna be a pretty simple reading from file. And once again, because I'm working with file IO, I'm gonna catch an IO exception in here, call it E. I'm gonna print out that exception message. I'm gonna import my IO exception at the top. And now I got some space in this try catch block to be able to write my writing. And let's jump over here, and I already have a couple of these different classes open, but we're gonna see something similar, where we have a baseline FileReader class that comes with Java that we're gonna be working with and using, but we also want to be able to wrap it inside of something else that's a little bit more user-friendly. And we're gonna be using the scanner class, something that we're familiar with, this idea of accepting user input. It's just that instead of taking user input from the actual user here, for example, if I wanted to have a scanner in the way that we've normally been writing it, a new scanner, I've been saying system.in. Let's import that here. System.in means the scanner is building a stream of information, a connection to inflowing data from my system's input, which is going to be sent from the keyboard. So we already kind of have used this idea of a stream of data before. It's just that we've used the keyboard instead of some other source. But with the scanner now, in place of system.in, we're actually going to use a stream of data from a file rather than from the keyboard. And we're going to process it in a similar way to we did the user input. That's a pretty cool little piece of functionality here. So the first thing I need to do is create my FileReader class. And what does the FileReader need in its constructor? Well, either a file or a file name, which I can give it. So let's go FileReader. I'm going to call this reader. It's a new FileReader. And it's going to base its stream on the file name. Let's import that FileReader up here. And here we go. Now we have this beautiful FileReader that's up and running. But as I said before, I actually want to build a scanner. I'm going to call this read, a new scanner. But instead of system.in, I'm going to be using my reader as the input instead. Import that scanner. And now we see, just like before, if I was to access the FileReader, I see that I have not that much functionality. It's able to read something called a care buffer, an array of characters. It's just, there's not that much to work with here, and it's a little bit kind of more finicky. But if I go to read, which is based off of my scanner, now I have all sorts of extra functionality that I've enabled on this data stream. So we're going to want to use this instead. And just like before, I'm able to, instead of making these on separate lines, just generate the new FileReader on a single line right here. And now that reader is built and up and ready to go. And so now that I've been paying attention well, I know that now that I have access to a file, I always want to make sure I close it at the end. This should be your first habit every time you set up a reader or a writer, that you build it, set it up, and then you close it at the end. And then the behaviors of this reader or writer will be held in between here. So the next thing that I can do here is read information from the file. But this has to be done slightly differently. Because it's a stream of data, think of this as us entering at the top end of the stream. We're at the very height of it, and we're running downstream. One thing that's implied in this metaphor is that we can't go back upstream. All right, we're not allowed to. So once we kind of enter in at the top, we're ready for the very first bit of information. But once we traverse it, we're not going back. We're kind of on a one-directional path to the end of that stream. We can jump off early if we want, but we can't go back upwards. And we also need to kind of tell our logic how to make sense of this stream. There are some pieces of functionality where we can read and we're able to find all information, like a pattern or some information within this stream of data, but that kind of takes us and we just kind of shoot through looking for what we're looking for all at once. We're also able to get information all at once, but that gives us very little control of the information being inflowed. So you'll see what we really have from most of our content here is, does it have information left? And let's get the next piece of information. We're going to get it kind of one piece at a time. And here's how we like to set up this logic generally for this type of a reader. There's different types, but while my reader has next. So I'm saying, while there's still some river to travel down, while there's still some information left I haven't viewed in this file. Now, you might want to spend some time reading over in the documentation this has next. Let's see where it is here. Let's start our scanner. This next has methods. Some information here that you could read about. I can jump down to this has next. If the scanner has another token in its input, and a token is something that our scanner is looking for information that kind of highlights when one part information starts and where it ends in different chunks. We're going to talk more about tokens in the next video because this one's getting pretty long here. But really, we're able to set our tokens with something called a delimiter. And naturally, if we don't specify anything custom, that delimiter or that token that we're looking for is an empty space. So has next looks for individual words, basically. Every space determines like a stopping point. And so while we still have words to read, let's just read it kind of one at a time here. I'm going to have my reader, and I'm going to have it, well, let's get our next string. Let's get our next string. And what I'm going to do simply is actually just print this out. Let's print out whatever is read in the next string here. And on each line. And here we go. So I'm printing out whatever string is returned next while I'm reading this file. And this is going to continue to read until I reach the very last individual word or string in the file. And I'm going to be printing it out. Let's go back to my runner. And so I've written to the file already. That file exists. I'm going to comment this out. But now my reader has the ability to read from file. And what did I call my file again? Let's go back and take a look. It's called new file. .txt. That txt is important because that's part of the file's full name in Windows. And now when I run this, I look down here. What's going to be printed out here? Here is some text. Notice that each individual word is on its own line. This is because in my reader, while I was looking for next information, I got it one word at a time with next. I could have instead just retrieved the next line all at once. And now if I run this, I should see that it all pops out as a single line of text. And this only actually runs once. And there we have it. We're able to use this bit of a loop setup. We're traveling down the stream, one thing at a time. In the first scenario, I traveled one word at a time. In this one, I travel one line at a time. And since my text only has one line, well, I did it kind of all at once. It was a pretty short river. I recommend that you take some time printing out and writing different combinations of text and information. Maybe you want to even write multiple different lines of it. Maybe you want to write this data more than once. And if we run this, see it appearing on two lines, and then try to read from it and get a sense of what these different types of methods that our reader and writer have are doing. Because in the next video, we're going to create some utilities to make our work a little bit more advanced. And I will see you in the next one, once you've practiced a little bit, to work on some more complex things with these readers and writers.